Hey there, historians! You ever hear the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Well, get ready, because we're about to dive into a historical treasure trove worth about a gazillion words. Now, before we dig into the old kingdom of Egypt and all it has to offer, let's check out today's goals. We're going to describe the geography of Egypt and its role in the development of civilization in the region, explain the social, religious, and political structures of the Old Kingdom, and describe the Old Kingdom of Egypt's primary cultural, architectural, and technological advancements. Are you ready, historians? Alright, historians, imagine you're in a hot air balloon flying over ancient Egypt. Below you, there's one awesome river snaking its way through the land, the mighty Nile. Now take a moment to think about it. What do you reckon this super river could do for the people living near it? You got it! The Nile was like a big water fountain and food factory rolled into one. It provided water for crops and turned the land along its banks into a green, fertile paradise. Thanks to this steady food supply, a great civilization sprouted in Egypt, just like a seed growing into a massive tree. The river was also like a busy highway, buzzing with boats. Whether people were zooming down the river to visit friends or delivering a boatload of grain, the Nile was like an expressway on the water. The Nile and its delta, which is where the river meets the sea, also connected to the Mediterranean, which made Egypt a hub for trade. This became an even bigger deal later on as other civilizations developed in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Worried about invaders? Well, not so much in Egypt. The deserts to the east and west were huge, and to the south, the Nile's waterfalls kept boats from coming that way. Wow, those things are more like rock formations with crazy rapids. Both of those protected Egypt from possible attacks. Okay, historians, put on your thinking caps and take a good look at this picture. Based on this image, what kind of government do you think they had in the Old Kingdom of Egypt? Bingo! That's a king, or as they were known in Egypt, a pharaoh. They were believed to be linked to the gods and even worshipped as gods. Man, can you imagine a president being worshipped like a god? But pharaohs were in charge of everything. They collected taxes, controlled the army, ran the kingdom, and made sure everything was running smoothly. They got some help from nobles who were rich and owned land and helped make decisions. But you gotta know, the pharaohs had the final say over everything. Giving the pharaohs and nobles info about things were scribes. They wrote down stuff like how much food was being grown and how many people lived in the kingdom. Sounds boring, but it was important to the rich folks. One pharaoh, named Menes, united the kingdoms along the Nile and took charge of them all, basically creating Egypt, even though the land was mostly that along the river. Menes was like an Egyptian George Washington, huh? Brain teaser time! Can you guess what early Egyptian religion was like? There are clues in this picture. Yep, kind of like a superhero team. Egyptians had a whole squad of gods. meaning they were polytheistic. And like Mesopotamia, their gods controlled things that were important in their everyday lives. The main god in the Old Kingdom was Ra, the god of the sun, which is pretty important to farming, right? Ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, but it seemed like a lot more welcoming than that dark place conjured up by Mesopotamians. Egyptians had other beliefs too. They thought of death as a transition to the next life. That meant they believed the soul needed to be preserved in order to reach the afterlife, which led to the process of mummification. More on that in a moment. You know how early Egyptians believed their pharaohs had a special relationship with the gods? Well, in addition to running the government, their pharaohs helped run religious ceremonies too. Even though they believed in many gods, they built temples that were usually devoted to a single god, and their priests studied ways to honor them. Here's a picture of a whole crew of early Egyptians: a pharaoh, craftsmakers, scribes, soldiers, enslaved peoples, farmers, nobles. Kind of like a big game of who's who in Egypt. Where do you think each job fits in the social structure? Who's at the top? Who's at the bottom? Now, let's put the pieces to this puzzle together. All right, I'm sure you all said that the pharaoh was at the top. I mean, he's the king, right? It's good to be the king. And just below him were the rich nobles and government officials that helped the pharaoh. Now, you may have said that the priests were next in the social hierarchy. But did you get scribes in there too? They were educated and kept records and made documents and were very valuable to the pharaohs. Next came soldiers. Makes sense since they worked for the pharaoh and protected everyone. Below them were artisans and craftsmakers like potters. Merchants were there too. At the bottom was the largest group, farmers. Even though they fed the entire kingdom, they were valued barely above enslaved people. Makes you wonder how much they valued eating, huh? At the very bottom were enslaved peoples. These were usually criminals or prisoners of war. Most were owned by the government and were used for hard work, like building the pyramids. So you've heard about hieroglyphics, like those you see here. But have you ever wondered what those little pictures represent? Just like cuneiform, hieroglyphics use pictures. The difference was, Egyptians used those pictures to represent both words and sounds. Egyptian hieroglyphics were used to record documents, religious rituals, and other important things. More on hieroglyphics in a future lesson. As mentioned earlier, trade was another big advancement made in the Old Kingdom. Egyptians used the Nile and its connection to the Mediterranean to set up trade with Europe, Asia, and throughout Africa. Trade with other places really helped make Egypt richer and more powerful. Okay, let's be honest. We all know that the pyramids are the big architectural achievement in ancient Egypt. I mean, the Great Pyramid was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still standing today. But do you know why the pyramids were built? Take a moment to respond. The Egyptians built pyramids as tombs for the pharaohs. Yeah, they're massive grave sites. They wanted to make sure the pharaohs' bodies were preserved after death so they could journey to the afterlife. The pyramids protected a pharaoh's body and all of his treasures so that he would have everything needed in the next life. More on pyramids in the PDF. By the way, you ever wonder what this is? It's called a sphinx, a mythical creature that is half animal and half human. They were built to protect the pyramids. The most famous of this one, the Great Sphinx, which is more than 5,000 years old and protects the pyramids of Giza. So, Do you have any brainstorms about what the big technology jump in the Old Kingdom might be? I'll give you a hint with this picture. Yep, it's mummies. And you may be thinking, technology? Let me explain. And I hope you didn't just eat lunch. The hot, dry climate of ancient Egypt meant that bodies would decompose quickly if they weren't preserved. Mummification allowed the body to be preserved for a long period of time, and this was important because of the Egyptians' religious beliefs. Now, think about all the things the Egyptians learned about the human body from this difficult process of preserving it. Yeah. Mummification was rarer than most people realize, too. Only the rich, like this pharaoh, could afford it. So it became a status symbol. We'll have more on the process of mummification in the PDF activities. Egypt's Old Kingdom became a second cultural hearth by relying on the resources found along the Nile River. Egypt's government, religion, and social structure were all similar to those of their Mesopotamian neighbors to the east. But their advancements made them special in many ways. Hieroglyphic writing represented both words and sounds. The pyramids and the Great Sphinx were uniquely Egyptian, and mummification allowed Egyptians to learn more about the human body. Next time, historians, we move to Egypt's Middle Kingdom, where we'll take a closer look at their system of writing and something new to write on. Until then, historians, keep uncovering the past and looking to the future. And remember to always be clever. Hey.